Welcome. Okay, so we're talking about elders and church leadership. I want to talk about three things this morning, and I'd like to focus most of my time on the last thing, but hopefully we'll get to that. I want to make sure that we have lots of questions and answers. If you have a question while I'm talking, just stick your hand up, and I will probably see your hand, and then we'll just kind of, after I'm done talking, I'll stop, we'll take your question, and we'll kind of move from there. Let's just kind of dialogue with that, and we may even get together in groups and kind of talk through a few things this morning. So we've got 60 minutes. We're going to move pretty quickly, okay? So when you think about elders and elder leadership in the church, what pops into your mind? Spiritual headship, okay. Okay, ability to teach. Discipline and direction. Accountability. Shepherding. Character. Okay, caring for the people. Available. Hospitable. Man who leads his family well. Come on, keep going. Pardon me? Not a novice, not a new believer. Not by compulsion. A crushing weight that never stops. Sign me up. Anything else? All right, so you start thinking this through. You start kind of creating your list in your head, and you begin to realize, wow, right? And when does that kind of like pop into your head, like the whole idea of wow, an elder this is not something to enter into lightly, okay? It's something that's of great, great significance. The responsibility is big, the weight is big, the joys are big too, right? It's all is kind of wrapped up in together. And so when we think about eldering, I want to start at this point, and it's this, that character, as somebody had mentioned as you started to get into the Timothy passage and the Titus passage, character is foundational. Somebody want to click my Apple thing there? Thanks, great, awesome, thank you. Character is foundational. Now, I find this fascinating because in all forms, when you think about leadership and all the definitions of leadership, when we try to define leadership, usually in a general sense of what a good leader is, how do we usually define a leader? Okay, someone who's charismatic, successful. What do you mean by that when you say successful? Okay, they're competent. Okay, a servant heart. Humble. Okay, so you're trying. I'm talking about the general definitions of leadership. Okay, of a leader. Opinionated. Okay.
Certainly driven.
Driven. Okay, so someone that has a drive. Drive to do what?
Conquering whatever it is.
Okay, an achievement drive.
Has a clear vision.
Clear vision. Okay, most definitions of leadership focus on the what of leadership. They focus on the ability to achieve certain things, having clear sense of direction, execution, and not only having a plan, being able to execute a plan. That's how most people define leadership, and how they also look or evaluate whether someone is effective as a leader. That's how most people define leadership. And I would suggest to you, because it's such an all-pervasive kind of way that we define leadership, that most of us in the room, when we're pushed and shoved, that's how we think of leadership. That's kind of like our default mechanism, right? It's part of the sin nature as it relates to leadership. We tend to think of leadership as more like the ability to achieve certain things as a leader. But that's not how the Bible starts when it talks about leadership. Like, obviously, I don't think the Bible is anti the ability to achieve and do different things like that. But that is not what the Bible starts with, and it's not the foundation it lays. What is the foundation that the Scriptures lay? Character. That is if you were to read leadership books that do not have a biblical bent to them, and they're defining leadership, you would rarely see anything talking about character. And we could all have our discussions about politicians and other kinds of leaders and things like that. We tend not to think of or emphasize the aspect of character. We focus usually on the what of leadership, the ability to achieve, but the Scriptures focus on character. And character shows up in not primarily in the what of leadership, but in the what? In the how of leadership. Right? So this is important. It's very, very important. If you're an existing elder or you're someone who's seeking to become an elder, you need to understand that character is the foundation point. And where do you find where your character is? Not as much in the what of leadership, but definitely in the how you lead. Okay, how you lead. How you lead others. Is that up on the screen? Can we get that on the screen, please? Okay, so it shows up in how we lead other people. This means that we have to learn how to lead from our biblical leadership identity that Christ has given to us as elders. It's not about, if you're an existing elder, all you have to do is ask yourself this question. When we're get together as elders, are we always focusing on achievement issues, or are we spending time focusing on character issues? Are we so focused on the what of leadership, and are we evaluating ourselves in the how of what we're doing in our leadership? Okay, so lots of pressures on elders. There's lots of things that are going to come across your desk. There's lots of things that are going to come to the table as you discuss different things. We can't stray from this. Character is foundational. There are lots of things that we have to do. We want to try to achieve things for the glory of the Lord, right? To see His kingdom expand. We want to see that happen. There's nothing wrong with that. But you can't stray from the character and the how of what you're leading. That's where the problems start. The problems start when we get focused on achievement and we stray from the calling that God has placed us on, and that is to be men of character as we're leading our churches. And that always shows up first in how you lead other people. How you view them, what you expect from them, how you interact with them. It's always about that. And so that's why Christ gave us all these different metaphors for leadership. So I'm just going to mention three, going to mention really quickly because I want to move on to this second thing. But let's just, the three things. I think three main metaphors. There are other ones as well. But number one, elders are called shepherds. Okay, they're called shepherds. What's the main passage probably that you would go to in the New Testament to see that? 1 Peter chapter 5, right? 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 5, or actually you could read even further down through verse 7. But that's a metaphor. That's again not a normal metaphor for leadership in the world, right? There are very few people that think that an effective leader. I'd say, well, what's an effective leader like? Oh, well, they're like a shepherd. But that's not what Christ says. Christ says we're called to be shepherds. Another metaphor is that we're called to be servants. Okay, we're called to be servants, right? In the book of Matthew. Another metaphor, we're called to steward. Okay, in the book of Titus, chapter 1, verse 7. So how would you know if you or another elder were not leading from your given identity instead of what I would call your achieved identity? You all know that, right? That our identity in Christ has been given to us. It's not, we don't achieve it. It's been received, not achieved. Right? And so Christ gives us this identity as elder leaders. And so how would I know if I'm more acting in my given identity rather than my achieved identity? Well, ask questions like this from those passages. Am I leading out of compulsion? You know? We all have seasons where we're kind of feeling the weight of kind of having to lead the church, but are you, as a elder leadership team, leading out of compulsion, or are you leading willingly? Is it like I have to, or I want to? I mean, I actually want to do this, right? Are you leading out of a sense of calling, as God would have you, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5. Are you seeking the spotlight or the advantages of leadership? And he says, not for shameful gain, he says. So are you seeking, has this become some kind of badge of honor to be able to be an elder in the church? Not domineering, he says, but be examples. In other words, is your posture one of expertise, and that I know what's right and you don't know what's right, and we're elders, I'm going to tell you what's right? Yeah, is that your posture, or is it more of a humble posture, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5? Right? Are you seeking out the responsibility from an ownership perspective or a stewardship perspective? In other words, do you have loose hands on it? Are your hands like this around the church, or are they like this? It's like, we own this. We can't blow this. This is our thing. Right? And so that's the whole thing. That's all tied around this whole character thing. So when I work with elder groups, I've had the privilege to work with many different elder groups. This is the thing. Every single elder that I've ever worked with, when I asked them, have you read 1 Peter 5? Have you read 1 Timothy 3? Have you read Titus? Have you read these Acts 20? Have you read all these passages? They say read. And I said, when's the last time you read that? And they almost always tell me, I read it before I became an elder. I was like so intently focused on the scriptures then because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making the wrong decision. And I would suggest to you that if you're not consistently going back to those passages and having those things about character and your identity as an elder sink deeply into you individually as an elder and as a team, you will quickly stray towards an achievement mindset versus a received mindset as your identity. You will quickly move to the what of eldering from the how you're supposed to be eldering, how you're supposed to be leading. Okay? Character is foundational. That means it's not just a starting point. It means it's actually the foundation upon which everything is built, and you can't pull that. You can't pull that out, and you will pull that out if you don't revisit to it. There's too many pressures. There's too many pressures on elders' teams to not discipline yourselves to go back to this. You have to go back to this. All right, so character is foundational. Anyone got a question on that? It's kind of basic, right? But not so much. We think it's pretty basic. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
I think the challenge is we know it here.
Right.
To live it here.
Right. Yeah, so Colin suggested it's like we all kind of get we get the mindset, it's in our heads, but is it in our hearts? You know, kind of idea. And there is a disconnect from that. And the best thing you can do as an elders team is build it into the discipline or the cycle of your elder meetings and your interaction with one another to continually kind of pull yourselves back to that. You should be calling yourselves back to those things. Okay, here's the second thing. Convictions are essential. All right? Convictions are essential. And these show up, go ahead. These show up in how we interact with one another. Okay, so I just kind of, I don't know what your convictions are. And I'm not talking about general convictions. Obviously, your doctrinal statement would be part of your convictions. There's lots of things. I'm talking about your convictions as it relates to eldering. Okay, what is your key convictions? I would suggest to you that there are 3 key convictions if you're going to be an effective elder within the church. First thing is that Jesus Christ is the head of the church. And you say, well, duh, that's kind of obvious. Yeah, but we don't really, how often do we practice like that? Do we actually kind of live it out like that? That Jesus Christ actually is the head of your church. I'll confess, like I read numerous times, Jesus Christ is the head of the church, and then what I do is, in my mind, because I have a theology background, I tend to push that into, well, yeah, he's the head of the universal church. It's just the head of the universal church. I know our church is part of that. In my mind, there's the tendency to distance, right? Christ is the head, and when I think he's the head, I think it way out there, and we're kind of down here. But when we're talking about Jesus being the head of the church, we're talking about the Spirit of God actually being the head of your church. Like, how is that your posture as you start as elders? That has to be a key conviction for you, and how you interact with one another, how you approach things. Plurality of leadership is another thing, and I don't know. Obviously, in a room this size, there might be different opinions on that. I would suggest to you that the Scriptures teach very strongly a plurality of eldership, and what I mean by that is that God calls a number of men to lead the church, right? Not one, but a group. Right now, you might be at a stage early on where you're a church planter, might be you, and maybe there's a couple other men from another church who are providing elder leadership for you. You're underneath, and you're working together as a team. Maybe you don't have anybody in your church yet. I get that. But you're moving towards a plurality of leadership. I do believe that, and we'll talk about this just in a minute, but that there are, at different times, that different people are called to have a different kind of influence in the room at different times. I think God calls people, depending on the issue and what you're talking about, to lead in a particular way with the group. But that the idea is that as a group, we are together grouping that together. So it's important, right? You want to have respect for your senior pastor. I think a lot of people understand that senior pastors have you probably bear a unique kind of weight within the leadership of the church. But in the same sense, it's not like, well, he's the leader, right? Actually, Jesus is the leader. He's called all of us as a team to lead together. And we understand that at any given time, we all have a unique kind of weight and responsibility to bear. But it's plurality of leadership. If you're in a room and the expectation is the senior pastor has to be an expert and answer all the questions, that's not plurality. Okay, just to be crass. Okay, that's so if you're in a room, I wouldn't put any weight on any one person. I would just say, if you're sitting in the room and your expectation is, oh well, that guy will he'll be able to solve all the problems, and you've been called to be an elder of the church, or if you're the senior pastor and you have this expectation that you have to be able to be the expert on every issue that comes across, which is like, to me, having been a senior pastor, is like, that's the weirdest thing in the world, to think that I would be an expert on all the things that cross the desk. But if that's the expectation, that's a problem. So plurality of leadership. And so this attached to that is this idea of equal voice, but not always equal influence. So when I'm saying that, what I mean by that is that what I just talked about is the idea that there's a plurality of leadership, but given the issue or the situation that you're dealing with, you come into it as a group, and then there might be somebody in the room that's been uniquely equipped by the Lord, or by through their experience, or whatever the case is. They're just equipped in a very unique way to be able to kind of rise to the moment and kind of lead in the process. And so that person in that moment has maybe a little more influence than everybody else does, an equal voice, but we're kind of working it out together. We understand that. Like, I would not, as a senior pastor, ever expect to be able to be the finance guy in the church, right? Like, to have the expertise in the finances. Like, that's not my thing. But I know lots of senior pastors that are really trying really hard to be experts over the finances. I'm telling you, it's hard to let go. And I think the reason why it's hard to let go at times is because we really don't believe in plurality. So there are a lot of elder teams that function with a number of men around the table, but they're still not functioning with plurality. So I'll leave you with that. Any questions on that or challenges? Yes, go ahead.
So, to the plurality of leadership, in an elders board, there should be, in my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, where, if we look at the equal voice, should elders not be overseeing certain aspects of the church themselves, like as the kind of pseudo-head with the senior pastors and the guy that has to kind of oversee everything? Like, is that not part of the role of what plurality of leadership is, that there's maybe an elder overseeing each kind of...
Oh, you're talking about like overseeing a particular ministry or something like that? Well, that's really going to depend on probably the size of your church. Okay, what stage you're at. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. But I don't think it's necessary for elders to have to be over a particular area of the church. Now, if you're a church of 70 people, probably your elders are going to be very, very engaged in giving direct leadership to direct areas of ministry. If you're a church of 1,000, not a good idea. Okay, so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Again, I don't think there's any one right model, kind of like in that. I think we're dealing with the principle here is plurality. Yes, Colin.
We're obviously not a voting church.
Right.
We don't vote as a congregation, but nor do we vote as a board. So for the board to have that collective voice, we also feel very strongly about the principle of a unanimous decision. We all have to be on the same page, or we do not move.
Right. So you're talking about a consensus kind of idea.
Total consensus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not we vote on the board and if 5 out
Right.
of 3, therefore the decision goes ahead. We don't move unless the whole board moves together.
Right.
We talk it out, we pray it out until we come to a place of consensus.
Right.
Is that still the position that's being advocated?
Yeah, I'm actually going to get to that if I get to that down.
Okay.
If I can get past what I'm going to talk about next.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so we're going to, one of the key things in decision making is the ability to, we're going to talk about that, like how do you make decisions together, and certainly, yeah, I mean, the idea is to move towards consensus as a group kind of, and we'll talk about what that means, what that doesn't mean, things like that. Yeah, so that's good. All right, anybody else? All right, let's look at this next thing. I'd like to spend a little bit of time here, and please don't misunderstand my title here. I just was looking for a C. So, competency is a difference maker. Okay, so we're moving now beyond the foundational points, and but I would say this: if you're going to be effective as you move forward as an elders team, first of all, as an individual elder, but also as a team. So think of yourselves as a group of elders giving leadership in the church. You're going to have to become competent in some different things. And I would suggest that this shows up in how you change together, okay? It shows up in how you change together. So over time, your church is going to change. So you, in some ways, you have to change as well. Not your responsibilities don't change. Elders are still responsible for the direction of the church and the doctrine of the church and the disciple-making mission of the church, and they're responsible for, making sure discipline effectively takes place effectively within the body of the church. They're responsible for all those things. But as your congregation changes, the way you might administer all of that might be a little bit uniquely different. It should be different. Okay, as you have to learn how to navigate change, navigate transitions. You have to learn how to make decisions together, and you have to learn how to communicate with others. And so when I think about navigating change or navigating transitions, there are two things that I think about. And the first, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, size and stages. Okay, churches go through different stages. And they also, Lord willing, go through different size things. Those and size and stages may coincide; they may not coincide. All right. So size is the thing. I love giving this illustration. Some of you have heard me give this illustration before from Larry Osborne. But when you're really small as a church, let's say you're a church planter, you're just starting your church, and you've got like you and your cat. That's it. Like it's just the two of you, and your wife comes because she likes you. So that's what you're starting with. You're starting with that. I look at the leadership of a church at a very small level, kind of like a tennis player. Okay, you're at the very beginning. It's kind of when you're on the ground, it's kind of like you, and you're playing tennis, and that's the way it goes. Now, hopefully you don't stay at that stage very long. You kind of move and you grow, you gather some leaders around you, and quickly you move from playing tennis to now you have a leadership team that's like, it's kind of like golfing buddies, where you kind of go and you golf together on Saturday mornings. This is every pastor I've talked to when we talk about leadership. This is the stage that every pastor says, "Man, I loved that stage." Right? It was like, remember when it was just the four of us, and when we got together, it was kind of, we just kind of bantered stuff around, and we kind of journeyed together, and we did that, and we had this really tight relational bond with one another. It was us, and it was like kind of like we were playing golf on Saturday, right? We were knocking the ball down the fairway, talking about stuff, and we hung out afterwards at the 19th hole, and we just kind of that's what it was like. Do you remember what it was like? Everybody has this nostalgic kind of heart feeling longing to be that kind of like golf team. The problem is when your church begins to grow, okay, and you start adding staff and you start adding other layers in your staff, your elders are an integral part of the team, but also you have staff that are part of the team, and so the leadership team of your church, it becomes a little more complex. Maybe it would be more like a basketball team. You start adding kind of guys that have key roles, right? So you've got LeBron, he's running the point, whoever that is, okay, and then you've got a shooting guard, right, off the side, because you need that now. So you've got a shooting guard, and then you got a guy who just rebounds. Okay, that's what he gets. Can you imagine people actually get paid just to rebound? Kind of idea. But there's that idea that we need a guy like that on our team, and and so it starts like that. And then if God continues to increase the size of your church, and you add even more layers within your staff team, you start functioning a little bit more like a football team. Okay, and a football team is like, it has offense, and it has defense, it has special teams. It's still one team, right? Still one team. But who in this room doesn't think it's a little more complicated to lead that versus the golf team? Right? None of us in this room would understand it. It's just a little more complicated. It's a little more complicated. And what happens is as size increases, the complexity of leadership increases, the challenge to communication increases, everything increases. And the way that you elder together, okay, again, it could be still the same team, that's the same team of elders communicating, but still the layers of communication, the way things happen, it's just a lot different. And here's the problem. If you were on the golf team, right? Do you remember? Remember what it was like? Oh man, I love those days. We're just hanging out, just having a great time together. If you were on the golf team, Now you find yourself on the football team. Are you able to live within the reality of the complexity that, number one, you might not have the same kind of interaction with those guys that were on the golf team before? Are you okay with not always being in the room making decisions? Because, when we were the golf team, we that's what we did. We just made all the decisions. Are you okay with releasing those kinds of things? This is a competency that elders, and actually any church leader, any leader, has to wrap their hands around and their head around and their heart around. Okay, the ability to navigate transitions in size. So let's look at. Could you just put that slide up? Okay, so some of you have seen this before. Not many of you actually in this room have seen this before, but if it's, you should have this picture on your handout if you got the handout. So impact of size. So if to the elder, senior pastor, and to staff, this is just very general, okay? But I would suggest to you this. When you're first starting out as an elders team, you're probably doing a mixture of doing ministry and making decisions related to ministry. There's probably a combination of those things. But you're going to see as size increases, and I'm not going to say, well, at what age, what number does this shift? That's not the point. The point is that as you increase in size, as the complexity of communication increases, the elder team it's not that they don't do any ministry, that's not what I'm saying. They continue to do ministry, but they move from doing, like actually being the guys that set the chairs up. Okay, I'm telling you, if you're going to become an elder with a church planter, and you think that all you're going to do is sit in a room and pray and figure out, what the direction of the church. You're going to do that, but you're also going to set the chairs up, right? Because there's only like 50 people in the room, so you got like everybody, all hands on deck, right? I don't care if it's your spiritual gift to set up chairs or not. You're setting chairs up, right? Right? You're hanging out. You're like that's what you do. And of course, we should never be above ever doing those things. But the point is that's all hands on deck. Let's kind of do this. So but as things change, as things grow, you can move from doing, you move more to an approval kind of thing, then you move more to a reviewing thing, then eventually you move to setting direction and boundaries. And at each one of those stages, each one of those transition stages, it will be awkward. All right? So just say, hey, remember that guy in Oakville that warned us? I'm warning you now. It's going to be awkward. You're going to feel awkward. You're going to feel like, I just wish it could be like it was. It's not. Because this isn't an issue of right or wrong. It's just the fact that it's different. And so if you're going to be effective as a team, you have to navigate these transitions. And I would suggest to you, if you're like in the approving, reviewing stage as a group of elders, you should be now beginning to prepare yourself to learn a little bit more about how do we create the right kind of boundaries for this larger staff team so that they can know how, what the playing field looks like, and they can actually, this is how they play, kind of idea. They can operate within these boundaries. So some call this like creating policies and procedures, and so that people understand that's a way to communicate. The bigger you get, the more you have to have policies and procedures to help people understand how they're supposed to operate. That's on you to make sure that happens. So elders have to learn how to do that. Size challenges things. The senior pastor has to learn how to shift gears too. All right? So pastors, there's a few of you in the room, okay? You think about what's your favorite stage of church life, right? Everybody has a favorite stage. I have yet to find a guy that the bigger it gets, he says, that's my favorite stage. At least they haven't verbally communicated that to me. Maybe they, in their hearts, maybe they're thinking that, but they haven't heard that verbally, right? And why? Because again, leadership becomes more complex. And I would suggest to you this, the elders have to change, the senior leader or the pastor has to learn how to change as well. There's an increase in leadership and preaching ability as the church grows. So elders, if you're going to help your senior pastor or senior leader learn how to adapt and shift, make sure that he's getting opportunities to refresh himself in the Lord, make sure he has enough rest, time in his schedule to be able to pray. Okay? Prayer is not an add-on to the job. Right? So, Pastor, do that make sure you work and then do that. No, it's not an extra, right? Remember Acts chapter 6? They dedicated themselves to what? Right. Prayer and preaching the word, right? And as you grow, that becomes the important. And then staff, the same thing. Impact of size. How does that impact staff? Well, at the beginning, you want, when you're church planting, you need a worship guy, right? A worship leader. But you don't just want the guy to be able to lead worship. He's got to wash dishes, and he has to learn how to run PowerPoint, and he's got to do all these different things. You want more of a general. You need more staff. More at the beginning is more of a generalist. As you move, you have the tendency to move that you can specialize a little bit more. But I would say this second thing is even more important. At the beginning, the smaller you are, you tend to hire people who can actually do the ministry. As you grow, and this is really important because we're into Ephesians chapter 4, right? Ephesians chapter 4 here. You want to hire staff who can help multiply leaders. Less about them doing it, right? Always hire somebody who's willing to do it. Okay? I have too many stories to tell you about that. Right? Always hire somebody who's humble enough that they're willing to do it. But you also want to see in them the ability to multiply others because the church is getting larger. This is how size impacts. And elders, you need to keep your eye on that. You need to keep thinking about it. Are we at the stage we're at? All different sizes of churches in here, right? We're from a few thousand to 100, right? Probably all across this room. And you understand where you are, and so you need to keep your eye on these kinds of things and be aware of that. Okay. Any questions or comments? Yes.
If your church grows and you have some godly men who maybe they're very qualified in prayer or shepherding, right? But the general oversight is not their thing, and now you're setting direction and boundaries. What do you do with those men? If we're at that point, board life is they're no desire to be on the board, but they're still qualified godly men who can. Ministry of prayer or ministry of shepherding is just their gift. Release them, man.
Let them do that. Find a way to let them do that. And I would say, yeah. I mean, I know, Dwayne. I know you're good. I just wondered sometimes, as long as we're not the complexity of leadership increases as you grow, but I don't think that means that we should be necessarily not inviting some of those kinds of people that have a strong shepherding and ability to be around the table as well, right? So, and I know you don't mean that, but I wanted to say that for everybody here. So don't, just because we don't want at the larger, there is a tendency sometimes to think, I'm not suggesting here that this means we're running it like a corporation. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? I'm not saying that at all. Okay? Still, the foundation is still the foundation. Right? This is not replacing the foundation. I'm just saying that there's some competencies we have to learn as we kind of work our way along. And so I would suggest you find a way within the ministry, maybe they could be a leader of a group of small groups or something like that, and they could use their shepherding that kind of way, and they can invest themselves in leadership with other men, kind of just release them to that kind of thing. And I know you, yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, honest question.
Yeah.
I put you on the spot, but I think we hijack the corporate mentality often. But by staff, you mean deacons?
By staff, do I mean deacons? No,
You don't need that.
no,
Okay.
no. Deacons would be, they would, again, different traditions in the room. I understand that, but I would suggest deacons are more probably in charge of unique kind of serving ministries. Usually that means like things like finances and building and maybe benevolence at times, different things like that. That I would say that the elders you're looking for, deacons to serve in those kinds of ministries. When I'm talking about staff, I'm talking about your church being at a point where you have an area of ministry that you actually want someone to lead or engage in or give direction towards. Does that make sense? Am I answering your question? So when I think of deacon, I think of the actual office, like the church office of deacon. Staff is not necessarily fulfilling the office of deacon. Anyone else? Okay, so I want to commend you. I wish we could just spend the whole time just talking about this, because it's a very, very important thing to do. But I would just suggest you look out for one another, encourage one another. On the area of staff, I would say this. I think it's on us as leaders when you hire somebody to prepare them for the next step. We tend to you hire them, maybe you hire them more to do something at the beginning. Then we get to a point where you need a multiplier, and it's like you look around the room and you go, well, yeah, he's not a multiplier. And so as much as it's on that person to learn how to become a multiplier, it's on us to give them opportunity and regularly pour into their life so that they can get ready for the next phase of ministry. They may not be able to get ready for the next phase of ministry, but it's on us to give them every opportunity to be able to develop into that. So I think that's very, very important that you work on what's your leadership development kind of structure and culture and your plan for staff and doing that. Don't leave it all on them, because they're really busy, and the last thing they kind of think about is how to get ready for the next thing. They're not even looking towards the next thing. Leaders need to be looking towards the next thing, so make sure you do that for them. Okay, here's another one. Let's look at stages quickly, and then I want to talk about making decisions. Okay, stages. Every church goes through different stages, and you could read different people from 5 to 7 stages. I just want to highlight 3 today, from launch to momentum to sustained health. And again, I'm not talking about size here. Size is not what I'm talking about here. There are some large churches that aren't healthy. Okay, and there are small churches that are thriving. Right? That's just the way it is, and so all I'm suggesting here is that as leaders, you need to be focused on some certain things. And the launch phase, like when you're first just starting, how many of your church is less than 3 years old? You're in launch phase. Okay? So that's it. That's a healthy, I'm thrilled by that, actually. That's great. So you're in the launch phase. What do you need to be focusing on? Prayer. Actually, every phase you need to be focusing on prayer. You need to figure out how to resource your plan. Okay, I don't want to be that. You just have to do that. You've got to figure out how to resource your plan. That includes people in the right place. That includes finances. It includes all those different kinds of things. Some of you need to be looking for partners to help you in the finances of your initial stage. You've got to do that. You've got to find ways to resource the plan. That's why planters tend to be a little more entrepreneurial in that stage. And of course, the problem with an entrepreneurial guy is that when you're not in that stage, okay, it's like, let's start new things all the time, kind of idea. So but in this stage, you have to learn how to resource the plan. And you got to be strong in leadership. You have to be very clear. Make sure you have a reason why people would not come to your church. You heard me right. Make sure you have a reason why people would not come to your church. Is your mission so clear that somebody would say, this place is not for me, as much as this place is for me? Be very, very clear, okay? So Ray's totally tracking with me, so I must be doing okay, right? So this is their intensity back there. We're all set. Okay, it's all good. All right, so make sure you have enough mission to turn people away, and then you begin to give ministry away to other people. Momentum phase, again, you're on your knees before the Lord. You're looking for space for growth. As leaders, that's what you're doing. You're probably looking for space for new opportunities. Make sure your vision is clear. Right? When you're in the launch phase, your vision probably is not that clear. You don't really have a sense of exactly where God is leading you at this point. You're probably not that clear at all. But here the focus is more on giving leadership away. So as much as the launch phase is on giving ministry away to others, getting more people involved in ministry, you're here at this phase is you're trying to develop and cultivate leadership. So giving leadership away. Learn how to establish rest during the momentum phase. Right? So as leaders, look at the life cycle of your church. Find a month, 6-week period or whatever, where you do minimal ministry so people can rest. Right? How many of you that are in a church that's like at least 10 years old? How many of you? Okay. All right. Are you busy?
No, not at all.
You're bored. Excellent. All right. That stage is not on this chart. There's another phase for that. It's called decline. So I would commend you to do an examination as leaders. It's on you to do this. Nobody else. Don't expect the staff to do this. Okay? Staff are wired to want to do more. If you did a good hiring process, if you've hired well, they're going to want to do more. As elders, you need to think about the whole life cycle of your church and consider times of rest. Okay, so I just leave that to commend you because you can burn people out, and it's really hard. And then sustained health, shift from personalities to teams. Okay, if you're going to sustain the health of your church, you have to shift from personalities to teams. There should be a higher emphasis on catalytic leadership at the beginning. As you kind of move through different stages and you're sustaining now, you don't need that as much. You shouldn't need that as much. You want to be looking for shifting from personalities to teams and then developing systems. Okay, so I've got about 7 more minutes, but any questions on that, on stages? All I'm saying here is take the time. If you need to find tools to help you with this, or bring somebody in. If you're a part of a denomination or whatever, you probably have a denominational leader that can probably come in and help you as a church to examine, to kind of have a sense of where you're at as a church, what your priorities need to be. I don't know. Or as you as a team, maybe you're equipped to do that examination as well. But you've got to examine yourselves and find out what are our priorities right now? What are our needs right now? That's on you as an elder leadership team to make sure that you're able to do that. That's one of your competencies. You have to learn how to do this. Okay, so then let's talk about this last thing, making decisions together. Okay, making decisions together. Colin brought that up, and so I would suggest there's 2 things in making decisions together as an elders team that are important. The first thing is relational trust, and the second thing is reaching consensus. So, How do you build relational trust amongst your team? Oh, I'm going to ask this question. Why is that important? Why is relational trust important?
Well, you need to work as a unit, like as a well-oiled machine, so when all the parts are in good working order, it just makes everything
Okay.
not even easier, it's just better overall. Like, when people see that you're functioning properly, joy about it, even though there might be hard work involved, you know that you've got each other's backs.
Okay. Did everyone hear that? What else?
Unity is
I think
paramount.
it's nothing more destructive than you think someone's got it hidden again.
Yeah. That's very good, Peter.
A house divided will fall.
Right? And I think that's the same idea, right? So the reason why relational trust is important is because if you're around the table talking to one another, and if it ever pops into your mind, I wonder what this guy's agenda is, or I wonder if I can trust him. You're second guessing. That's why relational trust is important.
The open communication, you can unpack things, and there's that trust there. You can say some of the difficult things, but you know the heart behind it.
Right. So how do you develop relational trust amongst a team of leaders? Time together. I don't see any other way other than that. Yeah.
Careful selection as to who you
Right.
bring on the board right from the beginning.
Selection's very, very important. Right. So you take your time. Take your time. Find out, like, is there a relational kind of, I mean, it's not like everyone doesn't have to be the same. They don't have to, you don't always necessarily have to be BFFs, kind of idea. But there has to be, your brothers in Christ, and there has to be this, I would say, not only a relational trust, but actually a willingness to really engage at a deep spiritual level with one another and encourage one another. And it takes time. Okay, it takes lots of time. Lots of time. So what are some things you can do to help that with that?
Elder training.
Okay, training. Yeah, that could help a little bit. Training can help a little bit. I don't know if training would help a lot with the relational side, unless you did. I was going to say you went to a ropes course or something, but no, it's a...
We have an elder apprentice program
Okay, that's good. Apprenticing.
for years.
Right, so that's part of the selection kind of process that fits really well. What are some other things you can do?
Elders retreat.
Retreats, okay.
I'd say even that time when there isn't an agenda, right? Like there's not a goal in mind. It's just spending time together.
Right. So let me put it this way. Even if you're not a golf team, try to be a golf team. So you remember that analogy I gave just a few minutes ago? So obviously you're not, if you're at a certain size, you may not be able to operate always as a golf team. I would say fight as much as you can for that kind of relational connection with your key leaders. Okay? That's the point. The point is, I'm not saying be a golf team. I'm just saying, like, try to fight for that kind of relational kind of capacity with one another. Because if you don't have at least a good foundational relational capacity with one another, when there's a hard decision that's going to have to be made, like you can't be dealing with in your mind and in your heart whether you're second guessing where this guy is coming from. We can't afford that. Right? We have to, and that is only as you kind of interact with one another. And then, of course, there's reaching consensus. So reaching consensus. Again, the church that how I operate, or how I have operated the last number of years, is the idea of consensus in decision making. So that is a willingness on behalf of everybody to come to a decision and to live with that decision and to speak as one about that decision. And so that could take time too, right? That could take time as well. So for, you might introduce something at one meeting and you expect everybody to be able to kind of get on board by the end of the meeting, and that's like, no, we're not on board with that. Like, well, then just wait for the next. Next meeting. There'll be some point where you're probably going to have to make a decision depending on what the issue is. Make sure that everybody speaks to the issue. Don't let somebody be passive aggressive. All right, so make sure everybody, if you have a chair of your meetings, like somebody who's operating as a chair, that's on them, to make sure that everybody actually speaks equally, has enough time to express that. If you're dealing with know your room, so if you have introverts and extroverts on the team, so some people process things verbally. Some things, people like to think about things ahead of time before they get to the room, right? So you have to understand what your team is like, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, how we interact with one another. Somebody would I don't need to think about it ahead of time. Let's just, I'll definitely pray about it, but I really don't need to process it with somebody. Let's just process it when we're in the room. We'll just talk about it. And of course, I've spent half my life with academics who love to process things verbally. And I can remember, it's like, when you invite somebody into a room like that, it's like, oh, I can't believe he said that at the beginning of the meeting. I said, no, just wait. It's not over yet. Just because he said that at the beginning doesn't mean that's where he's at. He's just processing it, right? And then eventually near the end or the week later, kind of as he's processed more and more, he's actually come to a different spot versus the person who likes to actually think. I actually want to not only pray about it, but I actually want to think through. I want to read something ahead of time, and I want to really kind of go after this in my own mind ahead of time, and then when they speak, it's usually out of a great deal of thoughtfulness, and usually that's really what they mean, what they really mean. So do you understand how complex? See how complex that is? Just that alone, that little piece alone, that's what you have to do. That's all part of reaching consensus, right? So consensus is not necessarily that we all have to have the same idea or all have to have the, agree like 100% kind of a thing. Like if the idea is consensus is as you go through a process so that we all come to a conclusion that if that's where we're at, I believe in that, I could stand behind that, I approve of that, and when we leave this room, we are united in our communication towards everybody else. No backroom discussions outside of the elder room. Right? Dan and I were on staff at a church a number of years ago where I lived through a painful year of backroom discussions outside of the elder room. It's devastating. Nothing will grind you to a halt quicker than that. All right, any questions or comments? Yes?
How would you deal with say, a unity issue? Say personality conflict. It didn't start off that way, but you couldn't have consensus like Colin was saying. And so build an off-ramp for that elder? How does that work?
Oh, like moving them off the elders team?
And the worst case scenario, or about, I guess the main goal is to try to keep them.
Well, I think, again, if you have the relational trust and capacity within the team and you're constantly interacting with one another at that level, you just talk it through. You talk it through. It may mean that you have to I hope you wouldn't have to find it, depending on the issue, have to find an off-ramp, but if you have to, I don't know, different churches do different things. Some churches have terms, some don't have terms, but or if it needs to be, and if it's just like the guy vehemently disagrees with something, and he's an elder and he's in good standing with everybody, I would say, whoa, let's slow down. Let's not make the decision yet. If it's it's a problem elder, it's not just about this decision, but it's about a whole bunch of other things as well, then you have to address that. It's not really about the decision. You have to address the fact that it's a problem. And if he needs to exit off, then I would, prayerfully and take your time in that decision. But if that's what has to happen, then that's what you need to. You need to make that hard decision and move him off.
I like what you said before, as far as unity. We do things together that with elders' wives at a night.
Yeah, it's great.
Don't have no elder discussion, just do life together, enjoy, and build that relationship and unity as.
Yeah, and if you can get a team of elders to never talk about elder stuff, that's good on you. You can write a book and publish it. Somebody had a question back there. Yeah, go ahead.
This is actually a follow-up to that, that it's invoked. The decision-making, when there is perhaps, like say there's a situation where one of the elders feels strongly that he cannot agree with the other elders. They talked it through, we talked it through for a year or 2 years perhaps. And it comes to that point where a decision must be made, but one will not, through conviction, will not accept or agree with that. At what point at what point does the group say, well, come with us or don't come with us, but this is where we're going?
Okay, so
Is that what needs to be done?
I would say that goes right back to selection. Okay, so you need to be looking for guys who have a bigger heart for the whole. Okay, so they have a sense of, God's called me to this. I'm really humble in this. I just want to serve the whole. And if it comes to a point where like you guys are really, you're here and I just can't get my head around that. I actually don't believe that. I think that's wrong. And you've gone through a season, a long enough season to kind of wait and kind of work and discuss that through, and you can't come to an agreement on that. Like if it's, again, not, because I'm not dealing with an actual issue here. So I would say if it's that, like if it was a doctrinal thing or if it was something of that kind of level, then I think that guy should resign. He should leave. If he can't work with the whole, yeah.
Just speaking to that very issue, if it's a relatively small issue, I think as an elder, even if you don't necessarily agree with guys, for the sake of the unity and moving things ahead, you will do that.
That's the idea of consensus, right?
That's the idea of consensus. But if it's something that's a major, major issue, truly if you're in prayer and the Holy Spirit is moving, Holy Spirit isn't going to say one thing to one elder and something different to another elder.
Right.
The Holy Spirit in time will bring unity on this issue. We've seen that here.
Right.
We've gone through a number of significant issues which the board was not all of the same mind initially, but over time, the Holy Spirit worked out that solution for us.
Yeah, so that's the key of, I think, don't make any of those kind of decisions quickly. You got to wait, really wait on the Lord. And what I find is because we don't select our elders effectively, that's where we end up living with the fruit of the selection process.
Can you speak then to that?
The kind of selection process, I think apprenticing is very important. I think that's a really, really good word that was said there. Take your time. It should be part of every church should eventually have what I would call a leadership development pipeline, if you want to call it that. Okay, a process where you're developing leaders within your church. And ultimately, that would include, you would have elders that would kind of flow out of that as well. That will allow, over time, you're being able to examine people over time. Like, be very slow to bring in people on your elder team who are at another church. Right? I did a session like this once, and a guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, now I understand why I'm struggling with my elders team. And I said, why did I say something? What did I say? It was the Holy Spirit, I hope. And he said, no, he said, when they recruited me to become an elder, I used to be the elder of a church at this size. Like it was a larger church. And so when I came into the elders team, because this church was a lot smaller, I had the expectation that I would be operating like the former model, and actually I needed to operate with a different kind of mindset. And actually, we never talked about that before I came on board. That's why I've been frustrated. Now I just need to understand I've got to change my expectations. So that's fantastic. That's great. But that's part of the selection process. You have to kind of go through, just slow it down. Like slow it down. Okay? Just take your time in that process. Yeah, okay, we got one more comment and then we got to quit. Sorry.
My question is your comment, no backroom discussion outside the elder room. I know with my personal decision-making, I disagree with people. I personally am fully willing, and I think I would actually want one November, whatnot.
Yeah.
Afterwards, or in another setting, and say, this is
Okay,
why.
so I misspoke then. Okay, I didn't mean no other discussion outside the room between, I mean, obviously elders can talk to one another about what was talked about. I meant don't be like going out telling people that you didn't agree with what the elders is. I know this is a decision we made, but I don't agree with the decision that we made. Kind of, that's what I meant to say. Thank you for clarifying that, I appreciate it. All right, let's close in prayer and then we'll get you off to your next thing. Father, thank you for just this time. We trust that it's been helpful and pleasing to you. I pray for these leaders that you would just equip them and empower them, Spirit, that you would just grab hold of their minds and their hearts. And God, that you would just allow them to lead the church, the church of Jesus Christ. We ask this in his name. Amen.